Hey Rowan, today I'm talking about vaccination. On Monday, your Lolly and I got the COVID 19 vaccines, and we got the Pfizer one. Now, vaccines are based on the idea that your body can build up an immunity to various different things, various bacteria, viruses, etc. And so, what they do is they give you a little bit that's weakened or damaged, or just barely give you a little bit, and your body learns how to fight that little bit and so that you don't get sick later. So you've had a bunch of vaccinations now: DPT, MMR, and other ones. And I've had a vaccine that you will never have. And that vaccine is called smallpox. Your Lolly and I both got smallpox vaccinations when we were young. But now no one gets smallpox vaccinations anymore because there is no more smallpox. Because almost everybody on the planet was vaccinated against smallpox. Now, smallpox is a terrible, terrible disease. And perhaps because it's been wiped out is one of the reasons why people fear vaccines. Because smallpox, it would make all of these bumps break out on your skin. And they would turn black and then blister and fall off. And sometimes all of somebody's skin came off with smallpox. It was a horrible, horrible disease. But in 1796, a man named Edward Jenner did some research on a related disease called cowpox, which makes you a little bit sick. It causes a couple of little blisters, but it doesn't never killed anybody. And he noticed that milkmaids who were around cows all the time, who had cowpox, would get the cowpox sores but never develop smallpox. So what he did was he took a little bit of cowpox from the hand of a milkmaid and injected it into the arm of a little boy, because that's what people did in the 1790s, because it was like, hey, let's try this. Anyway, so he gave the boy a shot of cowpox, and the boy got a little bit sick, and he got a couple of little blisters. And then he gave the boy smallpox, because back then they didn't have good technology, and it was like, okay, we'll take a little bit of smallpox and we'll give it to you, and maybe you'll get a little bit of smallpox, but you won't die. You won't get the full blown whole skin falling off thing. You'll just get a little tiny bump or a couple of little tiny bumps. So what they did typically back then was they injected you with smallpox, and then you could become a carrier and all sorts of problems with that. But he injected the boy with smallpox and nothing happened. He was like, cool. They injected more people with cowpox, and he tested them with smallpox, and they didn't get it. So he came up with hey, cowpox is similar enough to smallpox that the body develops an immunity against it. Now, later on, we developed different sorts of vaccines. We have some weakened vaccines where the virus does exist, but they treat it with heat and chemicals, and the virus gets weak, and it isn't as transmissible, or it can't be transmitted. And then there are other vaccines where they take a little bit of the DNA of the really bad thing and they put it into the DNA of a sort of, it's an okay-ish virus. It's something that you catch, and then it's like, if you have the sniffles for a day or two, that's the type of that's the type of virus that they put it into. So you have this vaccine that doesn't really get transmitted and just barely makes you feel a little bit sick. And they put a couple of genes from the really bad thing that kills people. I mean, there's dozens of these viruses that kill people. And they put a little bit of the weakened they put a little bit of the virus into this other virus. So they make like a hybrid and then inject you with the hybrid. Because your body fights the weakened one well, you don't get nearly as sick. I mean, maybe a sore arm, maybe a fever for a day or two. And then The newest virus, the one your Lolly and I got, goes a step further. And it doesn't have any other virus's DNA. It only has the little bit from the really bad virus. Because COVID-19 has killed over 1 million people now. So what they did was they took this little bit of DNA that makes a spiky protein, and they made millions and millions and millions of copies of it. Just billions. Huge, huge numbers of copies of it. And they put in little bubbles of fat. And they took those little bubbles of fat, each with one little teeny tiny piece of the virus DNA, and they injected it. So, the little bit of the virus DNA goes into my body, and the cell goes, okay, make a copy of the protein. It makes a copy of the protein, and the immune system goes, wait a minute, that's a problem. It trains the immune system to go after the virus. But the thing is that I can't catch the virus from this, because there is no virus. There's just this little bit of DNA for this one little spiky protein. Now, my arm still hurt afterwards, and your Lolly got tired and a little bit sick from it. But, we didn't die. And in a couple of months, couple of years, when our bodies encounter the COVID-19 virus, if we're just walking around and we happen to encounter it, we're not going to get sick. We're not going to die. And if we do get sick, we'll just shrug it off like a common cold, like the virus that I talked about earlier, where it's like, okay, I'm going to be sick for a day and just kind of feeling bleh. So that is a really cool thing about vaccines. Now, I mentioned a couple of the vaccines that you've probably had. I said MMR. That's short for measles, mumps, and rubella. Measles causes red spots. It kills people. It is very, very easily transmitted, because with measles, you pass it along before you get sick. Most diseases, when you're sick, you're transmitting it. Measles, you transmit it and then you get sick. So that's a horrible, horrible disease. Mumps kills people, causes swollen glands, other bad things. Rubella is like measles. It doesn't transmit quite as easily, but it kills off little babies before they're born. So that's a horrible, horrible disease and causes birth defects and nasty. And I said DPT, which is another vaccine that you probably got a couple of shots of. Diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, which are more diseases. Pertussis is whooping cough. Nasty sounding cough. Diphtheria causes problems pooping. Lots of pooping. Diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, tetanus. Tetanus is known as lockjaw. So if you get tetanus, you have this tendency to muscles go all rigid, which doesn't sound bad, but if your lung muscles go rigid, then you can't breathe and then you die. Tetanus you get booster shots with every 10 years because it only lasts about 10 years and your body forgets how to fight tetanus. And finally, polio. Now, polio was kind of a nasty disease. It spreads very easily. And it causes paralysis. President FDR had polio and spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair. Several years ago, I was worked on by a nurse, and she had a hand that was like this. And her hand was always like this and was always going to be like this because she had polio as a child, and it constricted the hand and got stuck like that. But polio is one of those diseases that we almost wiped out. It was down to 100 cases out of 7 billion people. Imagine that. 7 billion people, only 100 people caught it in 1 year, where it used to be like millions and millions every year. was down to 100 people. And then, terrorists happened. And terrorists decided that they didn't like vaccinations. And so, that one, I guess the terrorists won. I don't know. But anyway, vaccines are something very useful, and they prevent horrible, horrible things. And people have forgotten how horrible these things are. So, I'm telling you these things so that you remember. And I will talk to you later.